Well, hello folks. It's a gorgeous spring day here in the backyard of the Meadow House. And what I'd like to share with you today is how we're going to start transforming this 1/8 acre lawn and turning it into essentially a 1/8 acre garden. And we've already started to do some of that transformation. You may recall we were filming, I'd say roughly about 2 weeks ago. It probably feels a little bit longer than that because of the way that we release the videos, but there'll already have probably been progress made from the time that this is published. But what I started to dream of, and this has been a dream because I never really liked the lawn here and maintaining the lawn in the Meadow House. It's kind of a weird lawn. The grass grows really high in some places. It's a bit patchy in others. And my dream really was to turn this into a space that is just all garden with, like, I would say that if I had to describe 3 words that I would like to abide by in the garden, the future garden here, it'd be maybe calm, romantic, and elegant. See that those are some of the things that really come to mind. And those are obviously like very nebulous terms, and that could be defined in many different ways. But there is already been some great foundational planting in here. As you can see, some really beautiful trees and shrubs that took us quite a while to showcase because this was a really weedy bed. Obviously, there's still some weeds in it, and we're still working on it. We ended up salvaging some of this landscape edging from up at the common house when we took out the brick paver pathways and put in our stone pathway. And we just saved it. We didn't throw it away. And I just measured it, and it's pretty much the length of this. And one of the challenges that I always have with beds is that the grass will push in. Same thing with like this gravel pathway, the grass really pushes in. So if you could provide some landscape edging, that really helps. Now, I think this is going to be a series of maybe, I don't know, a half dozen or so videos showing the progress. So sometimes we have films where we show the progress from soup to nuts, but it's a long process. And I don't think that we're going to finish this for probably 2 years, but we're gonna get started on it this year, and we have gotten started on it this year. So what we're really working with is the foundational plantings that we already had, like this beautiful physocarpus. This is not in bloom yet, but when it blooms, it is a miraculous plant. There are so many pollinators, hoverflies, bees, wasps that find this plant to be such a treat. This is a cultivar. I'm not sure what cultivar it is. There's many dark leaf varieties. I guess we could probably triangulate and guess, do a best guess of what cultivar this is. But our native physocarpus has a very limey green leaf, for example. Then we have 2 hydrangeas here. We have a really cool pine tree in the back, pinus, and then we have a white pine over here. And we have a foreshortened kind of like Norway spruce that's actually still quite tall. And then we have one of these amazing maples, not a native maple, but it has that incredible bark. It's called a paper bark maple. And then some more physocarpus here in the back. And then I started to do some more herbaceous and smaller shrub planting as well in this relatively large space. So I'd like to accomplish maybe some of our design thoughts, and maybe you could follow us on kind of the design philosophy. Some of you have asked, like, how do you start thinking about the design of a garden space? And I think that's a great question. Sometimes it feels a little bit more organic. It's like when you're making a dish and you have your own recipe in mind and you put a little bit of dash of this and a little bit of dash of that. Some of it's very organic. You have an intuitive sense of what you want. But I started thinking about it a little bit more. And one of the things that helps define the space is, one, we already have boundaries This is 1/8 acre. It's kind of its own garden room. You could see towards the tail end there, we have a bench. That bench is actually not in the correct space, but it's quite weedy over there. That will eventually become a rock garden. That's something that we actually know, and we're not going to get to maybe until next year, but that's kind of off in the distance. I'm talking about this space right here. And the boundary is, of course, the house, you know, where we poured the pad, where we have all those planters, where we have that raised bed, which you've already seen that we've done. And this path is kind of defined. It could be maybe shaped a little bit better, because when we actually look at it from an overhead drone shot, there's some pieces of it that don't look so curvy. So that's what we hope the landscape edging will help. And then of course we have the fence line, which we shared in an earlier video of the privacy fence line. And one thing that really helps is pathways. If you want to have pathways between your garden beds and it not just becomes a one big amorphous blob of a garden bed, and you want to be able to walk and experience the garden in different ways, then pathways could really help define garden bed shapes. We don't know all the pathways quite yet, but obviously walking the space, we take drone shots from above and we might mow pathways in and see if those shapes actually make sense, not only from far above, but also on the ground. And I made some pathways on the ground with the mower. Obviously, it's something as soon as the grass grows, you can erase your errors. And we took a shot from above and we're like, ooh, those shapes don't look so good. So, but one shape that made sense is a pathway along the fence line. It feels right to just be able to walk around this. And I had already done, again, foundational plantings myself. I didn't come in with like an idea of what I really wanted to plant, but I did plant Camassia, which is coming up right now. And I feel that it's my duty to be able to show you this while it's in bloom, and it looks really gorgeous. And then we have some alliums also coming up. These are our globe masters. So these are the ones that will get a whopping 10 inches across. So it's a real spectacle.
What's the timing? Will these be still here when those are in full bloom, or do they kind of take each other's place?
So you'll see that these are just starting to come out, and then these Camassias, which are bulbous plants, you plant them in the fall, they come up in the spring. You start to see that they emerge from the bottom and then they start to go up. So by the time that these are starting to come into bloom, these will be blooming up here. So these blooms will have been spent or passed. But I think these are two very excellent plants for good foundational planting for the spring. So I'm prepping this bed right now with wood chips. I put cardboard and wood chips, something that maybe we'll talk about at a later date. This is the stuff that I'm working with that I have right now to snuff out the lawn and begin planting in, because I want to have it prepared so that I could plant plants that will be blooming throughout spring, summer, and fall. And the best way to do that is to have a bed ready, because oftentimes when you go to garden centers, you'll be picking up plants that bloom in spring when it's spring. If you go to the garden center in the summer, then they'll be selling you plants that bloom in the summer. And then in the fall, you'll be able to get plants that bloom in the fall. And then by next year, you'll have a full bed that's blooming all season long. So that's my goal. So one of the things that I wanted to say is, with the paths, we wanted to be able to define the bed over to the far left and the bed over to the far right so I could start prepping and planting that. And then we'll work out the paths in the middle, which is something that, Sandra and I are kind of still struggling with. So here we have a path that grows the full length, and you could see what happens when you don't put cardboard over it, because not all of this is Camassia and allium, but it's also grass. So
it looks like it's part of it though.
It does, and I wouldn't mind actually some grass coming up in here either. But what I'm going to do after all of this is finished blooming is I'm going to finish putting cardboard over this space and finish putting some wood chips over it and kind of snuff it out.
You'll bury it and then it will come back up.
I'll bury it and it'll pop back up in the spring.
Because are these bulbs or are they
They're
little
bulbs.
plants? Okay.
Yeah, they're bulbs. And actually what's interesting about Camassia, this is the one native to the West Coast. But we also have a native Camassia that's quite small. It's planted in our orchard and in our herb garden, and they have edible bulbs. So those are things that people used to actually harvest and eat, which is very interesting. One thing I should also mention about when I said calm, elegant, and romantic, those are the three words that really come to mind. There's a couple other themes that I want to share about this garden that I think that really resonate with me, that I want to be able to communicate in here. And I like restricted color palettes. I like color too, but like in most cases I feel like I'm more, I guess I gravitate more towards a restricted color palette so it doesn't look like all over the place. So,
yeah, because your planting is super dense. So if you don't do a restricted color palette, it will look like
fireworks
crazy,
display.
Cereal packaging in the supermarket.
Yeah. And so here, I want to go with like purples and whites. And when you go with purples, you could go with so many different shades of purples. You could go red purples, you could go blue purples, you could go lilacs, lavenders, pink purples. So there's a lot you could play with within that range. But I also find that like purples, blues, those whites are really calming. And calming is one of those tones and terms that I want to convey here. And I also imagine soft movements. And I think what happens when you get some of the soft movements is you could bring in a lot of grasses. So I'm thinking like this nice susurrus sounds in the garden. It's a word for you, susurrus.
Sure.
It's like almost like soft whispers, soft whispers. And we really get that with the grass up in the front pollinator garden. We planted some Calamagrostis Carl Forrester, and in September, when the wind hits the grass, it just kind of goes back and forth. And I can imagine, sitting out on the porch and just seeing some of that beautiful feathery grass go back and forth in with a lot of the taller herbaceous plantings. And you can see that some of the purple reds I've even brought through with some of these other foundational plantings. So I brought a lot of the trees out here so that garden doesn't feel so secluded. And this is this is a Betula Royal Frost. And what I like about birch too is that it has this dappled shade. You could see through it. It's a bit more wispy. And you could do some nice plantings under it as well that aren't in total shade. Because even though we have a fence line here, it's not really to protect us from our neighbors per se. It's to protect the plants from the deer. So we want to still have that ability to be able to see outwards towards, the road area. The wisteria, I should also mention, is in bloom. This is not something that we planted, and this has not bloomed since we got here 3.5 years ago. And it's kind of exciting to see this bloom. It may have not been a plant that I would have planted on a sensitive fence line because these do get quite woody and large, so we'll have to watch it. But I have to admit, I'm pretty stoked to see this flower because, again, it goes with that purple and white theme that we're going with. And it kind of reminds me of one of my favorite stories as a teenager. And I'm sure there's only going to be all but one of you who understand this reference. But Nathaniel Hawthorne did a short story called Rappaccini's Daughter. I mean, this is a story from the 1800s. So that's why I think it's a really esoteric reference. But I'll tell you a little bit about the story because you might actually go and read it. Just actually thinking about it makes me want to go and read it again and see the reference. I would like this garden to be a little Rappaccini daughter-esque And Rappaccini's Daughter is about this kind of mad botanist that had a garden of poisonous plants. And his daughter, Beatrice, was raised in that garden. She became immune to she was the caretaker for the garden. And she was like the most beautiful woman you have ever seen. And she tended to the garden, and she became immune to the toxic plants, but then became toxic herself. And there was a character in the short story named Giovanni who was on the second tower. Okay, the meadow house is not a second tower, it's got a first floor. And he would look over and stare into the garden and at this beautiful girl, Beatrice, tending these plants. And she'd wear like a purple dress, and she had purple plants everywhere. And I loved that story. I think I used to read it when I was a preteen, then a teenager. I read it over multiple times because I just thought the imagery is so beautiful. Rappaccini's Daughter by Nathaniel Hawthorne was probably borrowed off of another story or lore from Indian mythology or Indian culture. And so not Native American, I mean from the continent of India. So that story has probably been borrowed. It may be a little bit of a Garden of Eden story, but it was incredible. So I still have the picture of that garden. So I want a little bit of Rappaccini's Daughter in here. So maybe some monkshood, maybe some poisonous plants that are oh so beautiful, but that you wouldn't be able to touch or eat, for instance. So anyway, going back, this is a defined path. So you can see we have a very light line that I kind of spray painted. And I figured, okay, well, this is going to be a full garden. I'll take the idea of the Camassia and the allium. Those will be some of the bulbs that we'll bring throughout. Probably plant some more tulips in the fall, that type of thing. In those purples and whites, maybe little splotches of yellow. Nothing too audacious. Then you'll see we have our tree plantings already. This is our espalier trees that we showed you earlier. And look how they're leafing out. Pretty amazing already. So that's going to be great. There's a peony that had been planted in here. Unfortunately, this is pink. So there will be some obviously pinks. I'm not going to take this out.
It's on the edge.
It's on the edge.
And it's on the edge.
Yeah, it's on the edge. So we might bring some peonies in there. I think peonies are really romantic. We have some roses that we planted in. I might actually bring those out and plant them more into the beds once we start to define that. Another espalier. And so we have this little sneaky path that goes up.
Well, the main path goes here to the right.
Yes, the main path goes here.
But it's good to have like a little...
But we have one that accesses the outside. And you could see that I planted some Camassia just randomly in here. And then this, you gotta be careful touching this, is our nettle plant. And again, it makes me think of that Rappaccini's Daughter. It's these plants that you shouldn't touch because they can harm you. But this is an excellent herb, and it's a host plant for some of our native butterflies and moths. So not something that I'm interested in actually taking out. But I love how the Camassia kind of blends in with it. And we also have a dogbane that comes up here. It was coming up here the other day. I might have actually unceremoniously took it out, but there's quite a bit of dogbane. Oh, here it is coming up. It's a type of milkweed. And this is also a poisonous plant and a host plant for many insects. Here it is coming up, almost looks like little asparagus.
Get the big prickly nettle there.
Yeah, thistle, nettle, dogbane. So it's interesting. I'm very game for having this kind of wildness here, and some of that wildness still come up through the wood chips, but working with it and making it work for us. Now here's a lilac, and you could see that I started to attempt to put shapes. So paths can help you create the shapes of gardens and where you put plants. And I have these, things that we'll have to dig out and define where the trees and shrubs are. And
that way you could just mow or string trim against it.
Yes.
Without cutting the plant accidentally.
Without cutting the plant. And then we could actually take this grass down, put a layer of cardboard, compost, mulch it, and define it before we even define the beds. And what we've determined is that with the path coming up here, we're starting to see a bed shape already come together, but where I planted the plants, may not be the most opportune space. So this is our fringe tree, our native fringe tree. We're probably going to scoop it out and plant it right here, more in the middle of this garden bed shape, because there's also a path probably coming down here.
Yeah, so the motivation for that is the problem here is that this path, well, the bench is supposed to be over here.
Yeah, the bench is supposed to be right here.
And in order to make this curve a good curve, it goes too straight here now, and then it hooks at the end because it has to get around that tree. So by moving that tree, you can make this a more gradual curve, and then you'll avoid hitting your head against this thing as well.
Right, because this tree will constantly push out. Now this is our Vitex heterophylla, I believe it's the species name. I might have gave a different species name the last time. And this dies back to the roots and then grows back again. So this is another one we're gonna pull out, and we're gonna start putting this into the center of the bed. Now this bed will likely not get planted this year. Like I said, I'm gonna be focusing on the periphery and then work in, because Sandra and I are still working out the path. This one seems a bit more well-defined because this is literally the path coming into the garden. And that helps to define points. When it starts to get into the middle, it's like, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to the apple tree or don't you? You obviously want to be able to approach the porch at any point of time. And I love moving water in a garden, and we don't have the budget for it this year, but we love to get a fountain space that is centered on the kitchen window. So think about a really nice, elegant fountain, and maybe I'm at the center of it right in here, and it comes out. And so that way it's not too close to the patio, but it's something that you could actually walk around. It's a feature that you could walk around, and that's a bit more central to this garden space, but also helps define walkways and walk paths. So that's something that we're also considering. We started to create a template of the circle of where it might go. And then this is obviously a place where you come in and out. You could get your hose, you walk over past the shed, you could walk down on the patio, you fill up the space where the water is and has all the grass clippings in from mowing yesterday. But then this is a garden bed where the path is here. And so this is something that I'm going to have to work on and start to plant. Hopefully we'll get more wood chips. I meant to actually write our arborist to see if we could get it, but this is what we're thinking. It's going to be a slow process, but if I could summarize, define a little bit more of the personality of the garden that you want to feature. So for this one, calm, elegant, and romantic. Maybe you're looking at specific movement. Is this garden going to be low to the ground? Is there going to be movement? I would like some of that movement. I would like some of that sound in the garden. So some of those tall grasses I think are going to be really beautiful. Tall, elegant spires. I think that sounds really good to me for that type of quality and adjectives to be able to define the garden. What colorways are you going to go with? So like purples and whites for me for this garden is what I'd like to actually work with. It's some of the foundational plantings that we already had here as well, especially with the hydrangeas and the wisteria, for example. And then start to define the edges. With the paths, that really helps to define a garden bed shape. We're still working on what those paths are going to look like. Walking and seeing an aerial view, and again, if you don't have a drone, sometimes you could go with the satellite view of Google Maps and just use that to start sketching shapes on top of. We find that to be really easy to do, and just have fun with it.
Yeah, the paths will have to come over time, because the worst thing is you put in a bunch of paths and then slowly over time you figure out that you'd rather walk than take a shortcut this way. And then you have these elephant paths, they're called. Paths that are not planned to put in, but people take them anyways because it's faster, shorter.
Yeah, and then you have like all footsteps in your garden and all your wood chips and your wood mulch is like taken out. But yeah, I mean, if we have to move some of these trees because we want to put the path somewhere else, then so be it.
Yeah, we could still do that now.
Yeah, we could still do that because they're quite small. We haven't planted a lot of trees in here yet. But yeah, so I think this is the garden that I dream of the most. And we'll be doing, as I shared, a series of the design as we actually do it, because this is gonna take us a while. I'd say this is a 2-year project, but we're gonna get started in the spring. I'll continue to work on it, and as we make significant updates, we'll give you those as well. So hope this helps, and I hope you're excited as I am to transform this 1/8 acre lawn into a beautiful gardenscape. We'll be sharing how the gardens and wildscaped areas mature as the seasons progress, so if you enjoy videos like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notifications button to help us grow and share these videos to more folks. In the meantime, we'll be cracking away at more of the gardens and renovations here at Flock. We'll see you in the next video.